Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by John Jackson, who is a best-selling author, global speaker, executive producer, and Fortune 50, should I say, leader, and founder of 5J Entertainment. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hello, how are you doing? Pleasure to be here.
Not too bad. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited to have you on the show. I've nearly finished a documentary as well, so I was thoroughly enjoying it. So we'll definitely jump into that. Obviously, on today's show, we're going to be talking about your recent book, What About Me? Walking the Tightrope as a Black Man in America, as well as, of course, the What About Me documentary, which is now available to stream on Amazon Prime as well. So before we go any further, and I've kind of give a short intro, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and your journey to where we are now.
I've been very fortunate, Chris, being a corporate executive, having backgrounds in technology, engineering, strategic planning, artificial intelligence. All of those things have just been very, very rewarding. And looking back over my career, there's always been this piece of me that was instilled by my parents, my mother and my father, to respect individuals, respect people, treat them right, regardless of race, color, creed, socioeconomic status, but also lend a helping hand when you could, or when someone needed a helping hand. And I think that's always been a part of my fiber. And as I've gone through my career and seen different things, the passion has just been there. At some point, you've got to give back. At some point, you've got to share the stories, your experiences, which all haven't been great. There have been good, bad, ugly, and great and indifferent. So I wanted to reach out and take those stories and those experiences and share with others to show that, hey, you can persevere. Here are methods and things that you can do to survive. And I think the other part was to ensure that we could educate individuals about things that go on that somehow they don't really come out, but being able to educate, but then encourage individuals and inspire them to, go for their goals and go for their dreams, regardless of who they are, or where they come from. So that's kind of how we get here today, that corporate career, which is still in flight. It's work for a great company, great environment, but through the companies I've worked for and what I've seen, even to this day, there's always room for improvement. And I just wanted to write that down and give it back. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll say there, and I'll pause, my father passed away about 14 years ago. And that's when I really got to the point of, I need to capture this in writing. And my mother's aged now, she's getting up in age, but I wanted her to see what they poured into me. I wanted her to see me pouring it back into the world.
Amazing. Was there you kind of touched on it already, but was there a particular moment that triggered you to say, now is the time? Because obviously you mentioned you've been speaking about, you're thinking about this for many, many, many years, but was there a moment where like, okay, now's the time to put this
right?
This
I
out?
think just the collection of my history. I started speaking when I was about 6 years old, speaking on the Roman Empire and different things.
Wow.
Some people say, well, it's kind of a strange kid here, but if you read the book, you'll see the story and how that came to
Amazing.
be. But in early age, speaking on different subjects and topics. And I think one of the things that was a part of me was my ability to connect to people. And my mother said, you have this innate sense of connecting with individuals and people, whether it's one or two people or whether it's a larger audience. You need to use that to bring people together. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about that at the age of 9 or 10, it doesn't really resonate, but the older you get, you do start to see that there is something there and that it's to be used for positive. So after my father passed away, it just kind of hit me about 3 years ago, really about 4 years ago. I was making a speech and there was a lady who approached me after one of my speeches and she had tears in her eyes. Actually, Chris, I was trying to go down a back elevator to get out the back after shaking some hands to get to my car, to get to a plane. And there was a lady who had somehow found the back door in the back elevator and she was standing there and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I was not coming to your event today, but you changed my life based on what you said. And that's when I got serious. I said, I have to write this down.
Yeah.
And I have to put it there. And I mean, she went on and explained more, but I didn't expect that. And so that's where the book became really, really serious because I had been writing snippets and pieces since about 10 or 11. As a little kid, I'd write down things in a journal, keep it here, and I'd carry stuff with me. But again, my father passed away. I got a little more serious, captured things in a little more codified sense. But about that 4-year mark, that's when I've got to write it down, because people had been telling me to write it down. But when I saw her facial expression and when she told me her story,
Yeah.
I said, I've got to do this. So that's the book. And the documentary came to life about 2 years ago. I was in Los Angeles making a speech, and I met this gentleman. We were conversing, good friend now, Taru Brooks, who's one of the executive producers of the documentary. And then eventually our friend Daryl Pitts came on board, and I was explaining the same sentiment. I wanted to reach out and touch more people. And Taru is a great publicist, Hollywood and different places. He says, wow, maybe we can do something film related in a documentary. And I thought about it, and we kicked around some ideas. We talked, and ultimately I said, yeah, let's do it. I'm in. I'm all in. I'm going forward. I want to do this. And that's where it started to come to fruition. And, you know, through our brotherhood in terms of producing this film and touching people, the final product came out, and it's gotten great reviews, and I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, I'm near the end. It is pretty amazing, and some of the stories that are shared throughout the documentary are so compelling as well. You know, when you can talk about this and you can write it down, but storytelling is so powerful when you can see someone really connect the emotion, and you can see it. You know, it's very visceral as well. Seeing it on camera and someone talk over it, you can see almost people kind of going through that moment again, reliving it in the moment when they're telling the story. Yeah, and we'll talk about some of those stories as well. What about the title of the book? What was the inspiration behind that? Obviously, walking the tightrope as a Black man. Why did you use that language?
You know, one of the things metaphorically, you know, I'm a big movie fan, and my kids would tell me sometimes, you're always working and studying, even if you're watching a movie. And I'm like, there's always an example that can make the story better or make it more real for individuals who haven't been in your footsteps. And I thought about it, Chris, and I thought about it, and I said, I'm literally walking on a tightrope. I have walked on a tightrope since my parents started to explain to me what life could be like. And as you go through my university career and, you know, the different degrees and in the corporate world at different companies, you start to see the ramifications and the implications. And that's where I said, wow, this is like walking the tightrope on eggshells. And that's where I said, that is so graphic, and that captures the imagination to say, what does that mean to be walking on a tightrope? And I think the visual aspect of it is so clear, because then you see what my life is like. You see that I have to calculate in nanoseconds things that I say, things that I do. What are the filters? How am I viewed through different filters?
Yeah.
How am I viewed in certain circumstances? And so I said that captures it. And everything I do in life, leadership, the things I do about my personal life, all these different pieces are from the vantage point of, I'm on a tightrope, and I've got to manage this well, because there are folks counting on me and I'm counting on myself.
It's interesting as well, because when I saw the title, I realized that a number of my Black friends over our friendship over the years have actually used that exact terminology.
Oh, okay.
Like I sometimes feel like I'm walking on a tightrope. Like I very clearly, one of my friends, Colin, has said that to me in a corporate environment, that exact sentence as well. So it definitely does resonate. I'm sure.
Yeah, it does. And there's so many things, traveled all over the world, seen so many environments, interviewed many friends, different companies, places. And, you know, when you have those conversations and there's similarities, but to your point, the visceral aspect of it, when you feel it, when you're in that position, and, you know, and let's just take it, whether you're in university and it's about your grade and how you ask questions and how you answer the questions, and even if you feel that the professor is wrong, you know, the way that you approach that, it's different from everyone else. When you get your job, I'll give you an example. When I was an early engineering manager, early in my career, And I had one of my team members walk up to me and my boss. I had been in the job maybe a couple of weeks, and he asked my boss, "Do I have to listen to this guy? Or do I have to really do what this guy says?" I mean, and this was no joke.
Wow.
This was no joke. I didn't put this in the book because, I wanted to stay on the positive, but I have so many stories that I talk about live when I'm in an audience. And you have to ask yourself, so what does that put me psychologically, mentally? Yeah, I'm the boss, and somebody walks up, matter of factly, do I have to listen to what this guy says? And my boss said, "Yes, you do. He's your manager." And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" And he walks off. And that guy was an engineer. I still remember the guy's name. I can see his face.
I bet.
And that's been years ago. But then you figure out, what does the rest of the team say and feel? And, team working on some very complex things. So how do you lead through that? So again, walking on that tightrope. And there are many experiences and many examples that I have of, how do I say this? How do I do this? Even with people that work for you or work with you, your peers. I give you another good one. I had a gentleman walk up to me some years ago, and I had been conversing about a subject in a meeting, and he came up to me and said, "Well, I was wondering if there was more to you than just that suit." And it was a disdainful kind of comment.
I can't believe.
And the thing about it is, so what's your natural inclination? Your natural inclination is, "Hey, who are you to ask me this?" But on that tightrope, you just, you make a small quip. "Hey, you'd be surprised what you'll find in a suit." But you suppress your dislike for the comments, and you just have to get along. You survive.
But you talk about that in the book and documentary, where that builds up, doesn't it? And that causes stress and anxiety. Yes. That like you're saying, just letting those things slide. Or or you know what I mean, right? You probably can describe it better than I am, but I can. But it just builds over time, because you're always having, as a white male, I've never actually had to worry about walking the tightrope, so I don't have the added stress of what one of the examples my wife gave me recently. She's black female, is that if she's having a debate with the team, that she doesn't come across as an aggressive black woman, right? Not that it, if a white woman did it or a white man, it's just, we're just having a debate. Whereas my black male and female friends, it's like, "Oh, you're just being aggressive," right? That's another one I hear quite a lot from my friends and my wife.
It's traumatic.
Yes.
And those traumas are, for me, Chris, I've got a good friend in Chicago, attorney Todd Belcourt, and we talk about these traumas that you experience, and they're cumulative. So there are things that you experience and that you endure that you suppress. And personally, Chris, I think those things manifest themselves physically at some point. Hypertension, other type of issues, because those stressors that you have in your mind, it's tough. And it's tough. And if you do that every day, did I say the right thing? Or I have to be careful that, to your point that you made in your last example, there's just a debate going on about an issue, an objective debate, but your input could be viewed as, "Oh, that's very aggressive, very negative, non-team player-ish," those kind of things. So you're calculating, how do I say this to get my point across without having those stereotypical things thrown at me? And if you do that for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 years, whether you're working on a plant floor, whether you're working in a Wall Street office, those are the kind of things you have to keep in the back of your mind, and then make nanosecond decisions as to what to say. So think about that. If you're making these nanosecond split decisions on what you say, what you do, how you react, which is, some people would say, well, you should always think before you speak. Yes, I even talk about that. You should always think before you act. Yes. But then there's that whole nother level of decisions that you have to go through. And the ramifications could be much more dire for you than someone else.
Yeah, you can imagine how mentally draining that would be, just to constantly having to think that way. And it's not a positive thought, is it? It's not a positive thought. It's not like you're positively thinking about, how should I react to this and what should I say? It's actually a negative reaction to, how am I going to approach this and how am I going to be perceived as well. How do you think America thinks of black men?
We talk about this in the documentary, and I talk about it in the book to some degree as well. The documentary looks at mass media and how black men are categorized as pretty much three categories. And some would argue that it's a little bit broader than that. It's getting better with some regard, but entertainers, that's a way out. Hey, guy's a great entertainer, songwriter, what have you. Athlete, got the black person winning the Heisman Trophy, doing whatever. And nothing wrong with any of these things, but it's the fact that media in America, I think, tends to box in individuals. And then the third is criminals. You see on your nightly news or whatever, these individuals that are portrayed on the wrong side of the law. And then that becomes a persistent imagery around the globe. I've traveled all over the world, and that becomes this persistent imagery, and people get that locked in. I was going through Europe and I gave my passport. It's a true story. And the guy says, "What do you do? Sing? Do you sing?"
Stereotype.
Out of the
Just
blue.
immediately put you in that
Out
box.
of the blue. I'm going through passport, and I'm like, no, I don't. But that was the image. So I captured that. And so what we try to explain, that black men aren't monolithic. They're not monolithic. They're not just this one big glob. They're doctors, lawyers, engineers, hedge fund owners. They're carpenters, plumbers, dads, soccer coaches, great husbands, great fathers. They do all of these things, but we do have one common thread, is the experiences that we have, with racism and these issues, whether it's police or what have you. And so I think that's where the mass media view has conditioned the way people think. And what we're trying to show is that no, we're very artsy. We've got humor. We're good neighbors. We're good friends. There are a lot of things that we bring to the party in terms of who we are. And if people would just take the time, you'd learn that.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point, because if you just look back at the media, you are right. It's either those three things that you're talking
Right.
about: entertainment, sports. You're celebrated in both of those areas, or villainized as criminals. There's kind of those three things. You don't really see much media coverage. For example, I was surprised that one of those three wasn't as entrepreneurs or as business executives like yourself. Like, why is that not celebrated and talked about? We talk about, if you, again, in the news, you hear about a lot of white entrepreneurs and all the great things that they're doing. You don't really see many black men or male or females talking about here's the great things that they're doing in the news. You're right about that. So
it is true, Chris. There's so many stories out there. If people would look, kids who are 12 and 13 years old getting into college because of their math acumen, going to Georgia Tech or an MIT, and like, wow, look at this little kid. He's a black kid. I mean, that's a story. That's a feel good story, but you'll get more of the flip side of that than you would get the feel good story. And I think that's where we try to illuminate the pains, the traumas, the good, and get more of that into the ethos of the world so that people can understand. Don't be mesmerized by these images that have captivated you for not just the last 10 years, but for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
In terms of the demeaning aspect of people of color, especially black people.
What do you think are the most, given all of the work that you do, what are the most common misconceptions or stereotypes that people have about black men?
I think there's an innate sense of fear. Fear, they're not smart, or we're not smart, not good workers, not to be trusted on some level. I would say those stereotypical filters are used in very different ways now. They're not as upfront and they're not as obvious. They're more stealthy, but everybody, you get little things that you hear and little words that you hear and things you'll see, and like, wow, that's coming from a stereotypical filter that, either the person is aggressive. So you get all those things. Sometimes you get one-on-one. Sometimes you get them collectively, in the elevator, being in an elevator, you have a suit on and people shy away from you. Women, and clutch their purses. And, I think you hear stories about that from everybody. Those are the kind of things. But I think just a fear, there's a fear and for whatever reason that these people cannot do what we need them to do or we don't want them around. And that's so sad, because when you look at what's been introduced into the world by people of color, Black men, and what they do, I think some of these other macro images just distort all the goodness.
Yeah. It's interesting that you speak about the elevator example, because my friends and I do like a weekly Zoom call where we just catch up, because obviously given we're all apart now. And one of the stories that some of my Black friends were talking about, which they all resonated around, was how when they're walking down the street, or for example, we have a running group where we do like a 5K run every day. And they were talking about, my friend Colin was talking about how as a Black man, he has to be conscious that when he's running down the street of, for example, he's, many white women or etc. will cross the road. They'll see him coming, and he can feel the energy and the fear, and he'll have to be conscious. So he's like, when I go for a run now, if I see a white woman, or he was like, I'll consciously make a decision to move out of the way, just so I don't make that person feel uncomfortable. And that was like, as a white male, that was like, I've never thought about that when I've gone for a run. And they all related to that. When I'm running, he's a 6'3" big Black guy running down the street towards someone, and I've never thought about that, obviously, as a white male before that conversation. And they all of them were unanimously were like, that's all. And I was like, wow, like the fact that you have to think about that and be conscious of that just during your run.
Chris, it was interesting after George Floyd was murdered. There was this big outpouring, and I must say I'm very encouraged by the outpouring of people and friends of all colors and races around the world wanting to know more and learn more. I think that's really good. But I was asked one question. Someone says, well, John, does this happen to you? These kind of things, I said, yes, they do. I said, just because I live in a certain place or have attained certain things, if I were to throw on my hoodie and go for a late night run,
exactly.
Or if I'm in my car and I run to the gas station late, those kind of things almost immediately put a different context on you. And I said, you have to think about that. A late night run in your hoodie is different for me. I have to think about that twice, even in your own neighborhood, because there could be certain ramifications. The story that I do tell quite often is that about a year and a half ago, maybe two, I was going for a workout and driving out of my neighborhood, and I passed the police. And this is not a crack on the police. I know they're great policemen. Thanks for what they do. But I know there's a lot of things going on that we have to recognize and see what's happening in the world. But as I drove by, I tightened up, my hands, I tightened up, and I start to think about it. And sure enough, I see the silhouette of the car turn and come behind me. And there's just natural inclinations like, okay, do everything that you were taught. And if you guys read the book, you'll see what my parents taught me at 16, all the things I need to do. And I still do them to this day. And I said, well, let me get to a highly traveled place, because the blue lights came on, and I pulled over, and because what is this about? And so the officer, who was very nice, and I put on my most professional Bryant Gumbel voice. I've always been a fan of Bryant Gumbel. I said, be very, very proper. My mother would be very proper and just do everything right. And he says, hey, we had some reports of a person breaking in cars in this neighborhood. You're in the driveway, what have you. And I said, oh, well, I said, what's the description? This is a Black male with dreadlocks. And I said, well, I live in this neighborhood, officer. I live at, XYZ. Just saw me come out, and I'm driving this vehicle that it was interesting that I was pulled over. But anyway, in any case, he looked at me and I said, well, officer, I live in this neighborhood. Can you give me some insights? I'd like to know as well. And that's when he said, we had dreadlocks. I said, well, officer, he looked at me really good. And I looked the way I look now. And I guess he said, either it wasn't me, or I threw the dreadlock wig in the back. There's nothing wrong with dreadlocks, but it was just the fact that I didn't fit the description as he saw me, but he followed me.
Anyway,
and he said, okay, sir, have a nice day. So I was just saying that could have been different for someone else. I was blessed and fortunate that it didn't get out of hand, but those things happen, and in a split second, they can go awry.
But also, the fact that you have to then become a different version of yourself to feel comfortable in that situation is shocking to hear. Yeah. And again, during a podcast I did a long while back, one of the comments that really stood out to me was from one of the black parents who said, you know, white parents don't have to understand that we have to sit down with our kids at some point as black parents and have that conversation with them about how, you know, you like that. And that, I can't remember the exact words, but it was, you know, the fact that you have to sit down and say, just by having the color of your skin, this is the things you're going to have to look out for, the way you may have to act in certain situations. That was a real eye opener for me to feel like that's actually a conversation that black parents have to have with their kids.
Yes, it is. I speak about it in the book pretty extensively about the emotion surrounding it, the way my mom and dad explained it to me, and the situation where they explained it to me, where they, you know, it's one thing to learn how to drive, and it's one thing to get your license, which is like a rite of passage. Everybody, you know, maybe not so much today, but at that point, I want to learn how to drive, and you're exuberant about, wow, I can drive. And you get the proverbial, hey, let me know where you are. Don't drink and drive. Not more than one person in the car. And you get all of that stuff, and you're like, okay, I got it. Then the conversation gets more serious. It gets intense because you're ready to drive, and then it gets to now we need to tell you how to stay alive. If this happens. So I talk about my experience in the book and how that's some variation of that speech or talk is a common thread across all folks who have a child, a black child, male child, and female child, that they have to have that. And doesn't matter who you are, where you live. I tell people, you know, you could be a doctor, you could be an engineer, you could be a banker. Then it does not matter. You know, one story I tell is I got a friend up in the Virginia area, and he says, you know, I'm an ER doctor, and I always wear my scrubs, and I keep my ID badge on all the time going and coming to work, because I need to make sure if I'm trying to get to the hospital or whatever,
Wow.
I want to let the officers know I am a doctor. I am legitimate. Here's my badge. I work at XYZ hospital. And I thought that was always, I use that story because it's so gripping. I think a lot of people, if you do have your scrubs on and your ID, that is an outward sign that your job is important and this is what you're doing. But most people, you know, you just got your regular clothes on.
Yeah. Again, the fact that that he would have to make that conscious effort to be like, this is just in case, you know, just in case this happens. I saw a YouTube video which went viral recently, which is quite shocking, where similar situation to that cop that pulled you over said this guy fitted a description that they think, and he was sitting outside a bar, and he was like, it's not me, obviously I don't fit the description. And they're like, no, we want to search you. And he's like, on what grounds, right? I don't fit the description, I'm just sitting having a drink. And, you know, got into a big heated debate. They kind of, you know, manhandled him. What they didn't realize that the black guy was an off-duty FBI agent. So he's like, you're making a huge mistake. I'm telling you now, please just, you don't want to do this. And he was very calm. And they just grabbed him, you know, just put the cuffs on him. And then he was like, okay, before you put me in the car, just take my wallet out of my front pocket, right? And obviously they take it out, they see the FBI badge, and you can imagine the immediate embarrassment of they quickly take the cuffs off and so sorry. But it was shocking to see it play out, you know, on someone was just obviously on their mobile, just seeing the situation. And it was just like, wow, like you just didn't care. They just don't care, you know?
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, this is where I talk about the education part of it. You know, when I speak on history, I speak on many different aspects of things. I try to educate all people. Here are the facts. It's kind of like mathematics. I tell people, if you're going to solve a calculus equation, a geometry, a physics, or whatever equation, there are certain facts you have to recognize. Everybody has to recognize. There's no alternative. You have to recognize those facts because this is a hard math or calculus problem. Once everybody gets the facts, they may not like the facts, then you can start to solve the equation. Mm-hmm. Well, these issues are really hard problems, and you have to understand and accept the facts. So that's why I try to educate. And again, I hope to try to bring people together of all races, colors, and creed and socioeconomic status to realize that, hey, this is one big blue marble, and we have to learn. We're much better together, working together. The example I give is that we're out in the North Atlantic in our big boat here trying to get from US to Europe. And there's one group of people on one end of the boat says, hey, we're going to stick dynamite in this thing and blow this boat up because you people on the other end are this. And there's a small group of people in the middle saying, hey, wait a minute, guys. You know, if you blow up this end of the boat, the whole boat sinks, right? And I think that's where we are. We have to show people we're in the big boat together and we come together. We're on the same team. And I think from a leadership perspective, I tell everybody, whatever sports you've ever watched or heard about, you don't even have to be a sports enthusiast, basketball, cricket, soccer, hockey, what have you. When you have a team, you want that team to be the best that it can be, and you want every person on that team to be prepared. Well, here we are in this country, in this world, but I'll start with this country. We should want every team member to be the best that they could be so that the team can be the best they can be. Can you imagine if Tom Brady or Larry Bird or some of these folks, Steph Curry says, listen, that half of the team, don't train them. Matter of fact, don't even let them on the field. And you go to battle and you're shorthanded, you're short-staffed. You don't have the ability to win the big battle or to win the big game because you just excluded a third of your team. And guess what? That third had all these extra talents and skills. And so that's why I try to relate that to people in the business world, the entrepreneurial world, the entertainment world. Bring these different thoughts and ideas together. Bring all the team members together. Let them elevate their skills. And as they elevate their skills, it elevates all of us. Mm-hmm. But when you start to exclude, you know, and I'll say this and don't let me talk too much here, but I tell people, why is it that, again, I said I was a movie buff. Why is it that when there's some cataclysmic event, like an Independence Day,
I know where you're going with this already.
Martians are attacking or something, everybody in the world comes together.
Yeah.
Why do we have to have some cataclysmic thing to say, oh, the main thing is that we're all human beings. We need to respect each other, work together, and make this world a better place. You know, why does that always have to be an asteroid attacking or about to collide with us? And you look at those stories and I say, there's a bigger story there from these movies that people should understand. So anyway, I try to use those analogies and put people in positions to think more about exactly what's going on.
Yeah. What about for those people? How do you recommend that people, do we address those people that still deny, you know, the continual violence, discrimination of Black people, not just in America, but around the world?
What I typically do, Chris, I have a series of events and tactics that I use. I try to put people, take them out of their comfort zone or who they are and put them in the position of the individual that they have some animus towards, whether that's Black, white, or, and I paint this picture and go through these scenarios and start to ask them, how would you feel if the tables were turned? How would you feel? There's some great movies from the 70s and we can talk about it offline. You know, if for whatever reason your plight changed overnight and you ended up being that person that you despised in that position, how would you react? What would you do? What would be your emotions and what would be your response? And I said, if I magically had a wand to do that, then you could see exactly how bad it is of how you're discriminating or treating this person because you have no idea what they're going through. And I walk through that. And sometimes it's pretty helpful. I'll be honest with you. It's something that takes time. When you've got thoughts and things that you've been taught, things that you've grown up with, you believe, ideology, the ideologies and those type of things, you know, there may be a percentage that never converts. But I think over time, as you educate and help people understand, there is hope. And we've seen that in allyship and a lot of things where people coming in and helping. But really, to answer your question in short, I try to get people out of their position. I said, I'm going to put you in the position of this individual. And let's walk through the scenarios and the circumstances and see how you feel. And it's one of those things that's been very successful.
On that point then, for those people that do feel that discrimination, you know, what are some self-care tips that you recommend?
I think for me, and I talk about this in the book, and my faith has been the main sustaining factor of keeping my positive thinking. That's very important. I think my parents always raised me to understand that. They always raised me to be strong, but they also explained to me that, hey, now, as soon as you go out here, there'll be people that don't like you, treat you differently just because of the way you look. So my faith is first. Then I tell people, you've got to exercise. What I try to do is get up, exercise, get that blood pumping and
Those
flowing.
endorphins. Get those endorphins going.
Get the endorphins, because the stress factors, the stressors will build up, and you've got to get an outlet. I also ask people to find a friend, find a trusted friend. You got to get an outlet, talk about it. I think part of mental health, sometimes there's a stigma around mental health. I tell people, hey, if you need help, go get help, especially in the Black community. There's no stigma. Go get help, because when there are these traumas and stressors, you need to get this out. But if it's not to the level of needing therapy or needing professional help, everybody needs someone that they can trust and talk to get things off of their chest. Because if you hold it in, it does, I personally think, start to affect you physically. Then the other thing I would say is this: keep that open mind. Keep your mind moving. For all the interesting things that I've gone through, good, bad, ugly, and different, but especially the things that I consider that were the most trying, I had to always think forward and say, it's going to get better. It's got to get better. It's going to get better. I can survive this. I can hang on. I can hang on. And those are the things I would tell people to do, because it's important. Your mind is such a powerful thing, and you have to keep control of your sanity.
Another part I think you mentioned as well is also about making sure you have a sense of purpose.
Yes. Remain true to yourself and who you are, regardless of the circumstance. But as you think about your purpose and where you're going, you will have ups and downs. You will have bumps in the road, but stay focused on that purpose and not be deterred. And I think that gives you that ability to kind of bring in that kinetic energy when you're at your lowest point. That kinetic energy that reboosts you. And if you notice, I don't tell people to motivate people. I try to inspire people, because internally motivation comes from within. And if you get those right juices flowing internally, that's where the motivation comes. And then we should inspire people to keep building those things out. So I do talk a lot about that in my speeches, globally, in my life and leadership. I think it's just a fundamental fiber of who I am.
What do you think that businesses can do to help? Obviously, the HR Leaders podcast, we have, HR executives that are guests on the show, that listens to the show, who are literally, the work they do impacts millions of employees all over the world. What role do businesses play, or can they play?
I think the first thing they have to do is listen. I think typically organizations, big organizations, everyone is solution oriented. Hey, got a solution. Let's get together. We did these 3 things and it's done. It's not like that. It's not that fast. This is a long-term commitment to institutionalize a different way of thinking. First thing you got to do is listen to those people who are affected. If it's Black people, you have got to sit and listen and understand. And that's not just a superficial listening. It's a deep, intensive listening. What are your experiences? What has gone wrong? What are the things that we don't know about that we were totally oblivious to? I think once you listen, then that's when you start to craft solutions. I think DE&I is very, very important, but it's not a packaged up deal that, you win in 2 weeks and the job's done. I think in order to institutionalize it, you've got to listen, understand the issues, put things in place so that 2 years from now, you're not back to the old routine. And I think once you do that, you have to keep building. Once there's listening, I think there's got to be education. And that education has to go through all people, because people come from different places and different vantage points. They don't understand. Just the conversations that you and I have had today, people know superficially, but they don't understand the complete stories of how this has come to be. And if there's misinformation out there, you got to set the story straight. Then what you do is put policies in place to help make sure things become institutionalized. And then actually, when it all boils down, you've got to give people a chance. You've got to put actions to match your words, so that the team members, the collective team, sees that you're serious about it. You hear about stories where organizations says, "Hey, we're really serious about it," and then you look at their board, you look at their leadership, you look at everybody, and you're like, "Well, I guess you're not serious about it."
Yeah. Or even if they do have a D&I team, it's kind of just a tick the box exercise.
Right.
You
Right. I
know?
think your D&I has to be a part of your culture. What I would tell
Yes.
your HR team is a lot of times, and these are people I've interviewed, gosh, years and years, 10 years, even before it was D&I. If your D&I, what we call it, is like an appendage or a bolt on, that doesn't work. Your DE&I has to become a part of your culture,
Hmm.
and then it has to flow through everything: your recruitment, your retention, your promotions, your hiring, the types of education and things that you do. It has to be a unified one, and it's a part of your culture. Then that way, it's not a superficial layer. It's in the life's blood of the company,
Yeah.
whether you're a 50-person company or whether you got, a million people working for you.
Hmm.
And then people see it, because then, whether it's your office in Hong Kong, or whether it's your office in Minneapolis, or your office in Atlanta, or your office in New York, the way your culture and your DEI are so meshed together, it's for real. And you
Yeah.
have to take it for real, and you
Hmm.
have to take it seriously.
One of the first things that companies turn to is unconscious bias training. Do you think unconscious bias training works? Because there's obviously very much mixed reviews within the community.
I think it's a step uh, with DEI. I think it's a step that can be used to address some of those unconscious biases, but then I think you have to go further. You can't stop there. You have to go beyond that, because I do think percentage wise, there are things that people have just been trained in their behaviors, and it's like, hey, it's just the way it is.
Hmm.
But then I think you have to address the things that are outright. This is the way I feel. This is the way I'm doing things, and I do it for a reason. And I think that's where you have to educate people on how these things have been done systemically, on purpose, and how things still persist to these days. So I think the unconscious bias training is a good first step, but you have to go further,
Yeah.
and you have to get experts to help you show. Back to this thing, education. Some people may not want to be educated. Some people may not acknowledge that things have been systemic. But I'll tell you, if you go back and read and understand and get yourself educated in all aspects of life, and you see where these things are quite obvious, uh, that's where you start to make a difference. I was talking to a friend, and the person would say, "Hey, could you just kind of walk through history for me and explain some things?" And I went back, gosh, 1619 up until today, and with research and documents and documented information, and said, "So let me just walk you through a high level. So let's take an hour and a half, and I'm just walk you through a high level. Here are the things that happen systemically. They're still in place. Things are getting better." And she was like, "Wow, you have changed my whole way of thinking." And she says, "I grew up in Seattle. I really didn't think about this kind of stuff, but now I'm thinking differently about it, and I'm going to share with my friends."
You say that a lot, right? Because you always, in the book documentary, you talk about how education about history is the key to
Yes.
understanding the root of racism and knowing how to dismantle it,
Yes.
as well. But if you look at what we're taught growing up in school and just everything, really, you don't hear about any of this stuff.
Right. Right. So true. And I think that's the part that, if we back to my mathematics equation,
Hmm.
when you get a tough problem, calculus or whatever, you have to get the facts. If you get the wrong facts, you can't get the equation to work. I don't care what it is.
Yeah.
If half the room says water freezes at 32 degrees and half the room says, no, it's 68 degrees. Everybody says, wait a minute, water can't freeze at 68 degrees. And you've got this kind of dichotomy going on, and you have to plug that 32 degrees Fahrenheit into the equation somewhere, like a chemistry equation. You'll never get it to work.
Hmm.
So what you have to do is, let's get the unadulterated facts. And once you get those facts, regardless if you like it or not, once you put those into the equation, then you can solve the problem. And that's how I look at it. And I use that analogy in some things I've written recently. Here's a couple of articles as adaptations of the book. And I use that because, again, engineering in my background, but also the notion of international business and thinking about math is universal,
Hmm.
and those kind of things. The sciences are universal, so everyone can relate to that.
even in the documentary, right? They talk about the crime rate statistics,
Yeah.
and how misleading they are. In so many terms, it actually shocked me when I saw some of those, I heard some of those statistics in the documentary about crime rates and related to black men versus white men. You know, it's overwhelming, the opposite of what the media portrays it to be. And again, the numbers don't lie.
Right. And again, Chris, you'll see is that my ultimate goal is, how do we all come together and be better? And how do we connect? And how do we go after our pursuits and do the things and that we want to do and live together and make life better, not only for this generation, but the next generation, because we do not want them to have to experience and live with the ills of the past. We should be better every generation. And I think that's so important. But I do think you have to acknowledge the issues, those who are less fortunate, why they're less fortunate, the issues that have plagued them, the communities that suffer, so that people will not be left behind. And I talk about that in a part of the book where there's a portion of the community that will essentially be locked out of the big game. And that analogy is, a lot of times it's black men and boys, but anyone who's marginalized or disenfranchised. As the world goes more technologically savvy, and there's this huge consumer revolution, and there's this huge technological revolution. And I talk about this, and I've written about this as well. As those two things collide, there's more. Well, jobs change, types of jobs change. If you're not prepared, you'll be left out. And so I try to speak to that as well, about STEM education, about how people can be brought into the workforce. How do we prepare them? Not only secondary education, but primary education, or early elementary education. How do we prepare ourselves to be better so that we can continue to be a leader in the world and do those things that make America great, in terms of the true ideals of every person has a chance to be better?
Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time. What you're doing is truly changing people's lives. So thank you so much for everything. And for everyone listening, I know if you click the link in the description, you'll be able to grab a copy of the book. There'll be a link there to watch the documentary as well. Highly recommend both. Before I let you go, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice you want to give to everyone, what would that be? And then where's the best place for people to connect with you if they want to reach out to you directly?
What I've said on all of these different podcasts and interviews is that respect. That's where it all starts. And then treat people right. I think that's fundamental. If we can get there with respect and treating people right, that's a fundamental building block. And then we can go from there to understand all these other things. But without respect and without the desire to treat people right, it goes to pot pretty quick. But yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn at D.John.Jackson, D.John.Jackson. On Facebook, it's D.John.Jackson. On Instagram, it's D.John_Jackson. On Twitter, it's at D.John.Jackson. And if you want to see something about the book, I have www.djohnjackson.com, has some information about the book. And then for my company, 5J Entertainment, which created and produced the documentary, it's www.5j-entertainment.com.
Amazing. And for everyone listening, those links are all below to make your life a lot easier as well. They'll all be there. But look, thanks again for everything. And congratulations on the book, documentary. And I look forward to doing this again soon. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Bye-bye. See you later.